Good, everyone. Welcome to our latest Econ Talk. Gareth, we've had the Reserve Bank's monetary policy statement for May come out, and wow, things were a whole lot closer than we might have first expected. Looking down the statement, sort of at the start, everything was normal. There was no change to the official cash rate, things staying at 2.25%. Go to the end, though, of the record of meeting, and we had a split vote, 3-3, between the internal members of the Monetary Policy Committee who wanted to keep the official cash rate on hold, and the three externals who wanted to raise the official cash rate at the May meeting up to 2.5%. And with that sort of split vote, you had the governor herself who had to come through, put her casting vote in favour of retaining the official cash rate at 2.25%. So end outcome exactly as expected, but my goodness, a whole lot closer than we might have first been thinking, and sort of does set the pathway going forward. The Reserve Bank does seem pretty clear across the Monetary Policy Committee that interest rates are going to likely need to increase them. It can never be, of course, definitive, but some real sort of different views on how quickly you get that process going, given all of the sort of different concerns and angles out there in the economy. Now, you've gone through the statement a little bit more. What are those sort of competing arguments that are coming through from different parts of the committee?
Yeah, so the internal members from the Reserve Bank, I mean, they're looking at the sort of inflation data. Core inflation is under control. Wage growth is nice and low at around about 2%. Inflation expectations, yes, they've ticked up some of the shorter term stuff, but longer term inflation expectations are sort of well anchored. And so those internal members are taking a bit of the view of, we actually want to see hard evidence in the data that inflation is becoming a problem or is going to become a problem before we think we need to raise. Whereas the members on the other side of the table were saying, well, we know we're going to have to raise. Everyone's agreed on that. That is the likely future path from here. The OCR at 2.25% is below the neutral rate, which is around about 3%, according to the Reserve Bank's estimates. And so we're stimulating the economy, and inflation is potentially a bit of a problem. So if we move back towards neutral, it means we probably have to do less further down the track, and it helps to reduce some of those medium-term inflationary risks. So those are sort of the competing views that are there in terms of where the official cash rate goes to, or more importantly, the timing of that raise, as I say, rather than really the direction of it. It was interesting also looking at the Reserve Bank's forecasts around inflation themselves. They see inflation peaking at 4.3% in the September quarter this year. Not too much argument about the sort of general direction in the near term of where inflation goes, but they do have it coming back as well pretty quickly down to 2% by September next year, which suggests, again, perhaps internally within the Reserve Bank, that there's not a belief that we are going to have sort of persistent inflation problems arising out of the fuel price spike that we're seeing at the moment, and some of those sort of weaker demand issues and household incomes being squeezed. That is going to be more of the dominant driver of economic outcomes going forward from here. But I guess the message I took out of all of that really was that still the OCR is going to go up, and 3% is probably where we're heading by the end of this year, both in terms of financial market expectations and indeed the Reserve Bank's own forecasts as well.
Which is interesting, right? Because, I mean, you look at sort of the wide array of data out there, all the challenges. I sort of get what the internal members are saying in terms of, wanting to see a bit more inflation actually coming through. But I do worry that's very much what we saw last time headline inflation sort of got out of control. By the time it was clear that it was happening, you've sort of almost been overrun by it. It was sort of moving too quick at that point to arrest it. And therefore, that sort of thinking around, look, if you know where you're going to eventually get to, why don't you start now? Don't sort of delay. I do think there's sort of an element of that's more convincing in my mind of starting to get going and maybe not needing to do quite as much out the other end. Now, the Reserve Bank, I think, has also been clear they want to try and limit some of the volatility in the system, and I get that. But you've now got sort of interest rates, actual interest rates being charged that have already increased substantially. So realistically, the OCR itself might not have done anything to sort of create any short-term instability. But I really do just wonder if it might have given them more options out the other side, either to sort of figure out the timing a bit more, figure out how quickly they might be able to end the potential raising cycle. I mean, at the moment, the forecasts from the Reserve Bank seem pretty consistent with another three increases to start with this year. There's only 4 meetings. You can sort of pick and choose which ones. July seems to be odds on at the moment, unless something really wild happens. I guess the question is, after that, do the Reserve Bank need to go further than 3%? Will that be enough? Remembering, of course, that they were going to get back to 3% anyway, maybe later on, but the sort of view from before the oil price shock was that they'd get there. Surely there's a rising risk that there's more that has to be done over effectively a shorter period of time to try and nip that inflation pressure, if it and as it probably comes on board, nip it in the bud.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, if you're getting back to 3%, okay, at 3%, you're not stimulating the economy, but you're also not restricting those inflationary pressures that potentially are going to build over the next 6 months or so as we see the effects of the fuel price spike flow through into higher prices for other goods and services, which we haven't yet seen to any great extent. It is still to come. So yeah, for me, it is that's where the sort of variation of forecasts start to show up, not just in terms of the Reserve Bank's own thinking, where I think the OCR doesn't really get beyond 325 over their forecast horizon, but even on the private sector as well, where you do have some of the banks, for example, suggesting that the OCR will max out at about 3 or 3.25. You've got others which are saying 4%, possibly up to 4.5% is where it will need to go, because we have more of an inflation problem on our hands, and the Reserve Bank will need to fight harder against that, particularly given the experience of 2021, 2022, and businesses being more likely, even in a situation of weaker demand conditions, to pass those sort of cost and pricing pressures on to their customers as well. So yeah, still a lot of uncertainty there, I think, about the outlook for 2027 in terms of interest rates, but a bit more clarity on 2026 coming out of it, and for the second half of this year, despite the fact that we obviously had a split decision today in terms of the vote and the Reserve Bank, quite a division there, I think, between different members of the committee in terms of where things or when things should go.
And that's the thing, right? No one on the committee seemed to be saying, look, we won't need to increase. It was more of a question of when do we start. Did get over the line today. It got very close. But of course, looks odds on for a increase coming through in July. And probably in that case, you'd be expecting sort of an increase broadly every meeting, but still a little bit data dependent as sort of things come in. And again, that sort of question, even ourselves, of how quickly some of those pressures might show through in the actual numbers. Yes, you've seen fuel prices that have increased significantly. One, what happens with the conflict in general? Have we got a ceasefire? Are we still sending missiles through? What's the deal there? Because every time we seem to get close, we seem to get further away. But also how quickly that comes through actual supply chains. You know, how quickly are businesses able to or willing to adjust? And do you sort of get lulled into this false sense of security of, well, prices haven't increased more broadly immediately, and then whack, there they come sort of a couple of weeks later as they've worked it through. A lot still to try and assess as we go forward. Of course, got budget as well. So a lot of moving parts all at once, and we'll assess all of that on a future Econ Talk.